And I'll begin with you, Malcolm. I guess you are, in this tale, you're Mufasa, right? So when it's time for you, and I'm not suggesting anything, when it's time for you to choose your successor, let's say 40 years from now, what qualities will you be looking for?
Well, I plan to step down the year after Shimon Peres decides.
So 50 years.
You know, age can be an asset at times. It does bring some wisdom and experience. You know, people don't know that eagles, when they reach the age of 35, their claws grow and they can't grasp things anymore, and their beaks grow so they can't eat. And they go off into isolated areas, and they shed the beaks, and they shed their claws, and they grow back new ones, and then they go out for 35 more years.
So you have a plan.
Soaring high. And
you just turned
high.
29, so 6 years from now.
I have 6 years to get rid of the claws. I don't remember what the question was. My successor, okay. He's not here. I think the truth is that Jewish leadership, if Moshe could sum it up in 2 words, so can we. He summed it up when he turned it over to Joshua, and he said, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and of good courage. That's what he said a Jewish leader must be. He didn't give him 47 characteristics and all sorts of questionnaires and everything else. He said, Chazak ve'amatz, which means be strong and of good courage. They didn't mean that Joshua should go to Jack LaLanne and start working out. What he meant was, be strong in your convictions and have the courage to act on them. There are a lot of leaders with convictions but no courage. There are a lot of leaders with courage but no convictions. A Jewish leader has to have both, and rooted in Jewish knowledge and Jewish understanding, Jewish values, which can be interpreted differently, I agree. But the first thing, you can't teach people, whenever I hire anybody, I look for the passion, because that's not something you can instruct people with. It's something that has to come from within. And when you hear a student who can express herself in that way, you see the passion. Everything else will come with it. And for us all along, Moshe also taught us in the midst of Hakel that the greatest dangers to the Jewish people are not natural disasters or war, but ignorance, apathy, and indifference. Those are the things we could not overcome. And the greatest asset of the Jewish people is the one precondition to every great thing that happened to us throughout our history, and that was Achdus. When Jews stood together, everything was possible. When Jews were disunited, every challenge was too great. So a Jewish leader today has to be able to look beyond their own personal prejudices and to try to look at the broader view, to be able to see how we bring Jews together. And I must say that the language we hear here in Israel often, and lately especially, I think is very detrimental, regardless of their principles, and regardless of, I'm not saying people should compromise on their views or in their principles, but we are delegitimizing ourselves. As we fight delegitimization, this is to me a great challenge. So it also has somebody who has to be able to educate and be educated, has to be open to learning, and be willing to tell the truth. Too many times people, when I speak, and many people have heard me, they say, oh, it's always doom and gloom. It's not. When the Nevi'im prophesied, people called them prophets of doom. They were prophets of hope. You had to listen to the message. Being told the truth is not doom and gloom. Ignorance is doom and gloom. We paid the price for that over and over again when Jewish leaders are not willing to look beyond the moment, to anticipate, to understand what the challenges really mean. Jews look back, but we don't look back to get lost in history. We look back to learn the lessons to spare future generations those trials and tribulation. It's a unique approach to history, that for us, history is not about the past, it's about the future. So we need people who are going to be rooted in our Jewish past. Shimshon Raphael Hirsch said that no generation is judged in its time. We're not even judged by our children, we're judged by our grandchildren. because that's when you really see come to fruition, whether you had the foresight to look beyond the moment, not just how you raised your kids, but what influence you had ultimately that your grandchildren should be Jews and should be active and be part of the Jewish community. And I think now we also need people who are prepared to think out of the box. I admit that I'm not of the generation that knows about Twitter, Facebook, all those things, but I know that I get somebody like Jerry Ostroff who does know it, and that we create programs that will reach the young people and speak to young people, that we have to think out of the box and say the traditional ways are no longer necessarily relevant for today, that we have to bring the best minds. If Mark Zuckerberg's not involved, it's our fault, not his. We have to find ways that will make it attractive for Mark Zuckerberg to play a role in the Jewish community. And I find that when you give, even the most distant people sometimes, and often those who didn't admit they're Jews until well into the program, all of a sudden, they sit down one day and say, you know, I'm really Jewish. And this is the first time I've had a chance to be proud to say it. The Soviet Jewry movement did that for us. Soviet Jews saved a generation of American Jews. Not only did we save Soviet Jews, and they did it because they gave us the pride, the sense of self-identity. When people went out on Fifth Avenue, when we organized the first Solidarity Days, most organizations didn't want to join. But Soviet Jews inspired us. They taught us how to do it. They showed us the example. And we have to show the next generation. Unfortunately, our successes, we saved Syrian Jews and Ethiopian Jews and Russian Jews. We have nobody left to save. We don't have causes in which to round, not just Iran. When I was asked recently in a panel, and I'll close with this, you know, what inspired me, I said the Shoah. I remember, I didn't live in the Shoah, but I remember when my parents got the notice that their parents and my aunts and uncles and everybody was confirmed to have been killed. I remember the aftermath of the Shoah. And a young person on the panel said, well, that's negative. And I said, no, it's not negative. Learning the lessons of the past is not negative. It's an insurance policy to make sure that we don't repeat it in the future. That we have to sit back, and as Jews, it's the way we are instructed to look at history. It's a unique approach. So if I had one formula for people in the future, it's less meetings, more babies. We need to have greater Jewish population. We have to educate them. We have to invest in our young people. We have to have more action, creative action, big ways that we can find. We have to talk about Jewish victories, not just Jewish tzaras. We aren't identified by the Shoah, but we have to remember that we are rooted. We look back to all the lessons of history because it's always relevant to contemporary times. Those who learn the lessons are prepared to meet the challenges of the future. In that respect, H can be, because sometimes you live through all of those things and you've seen it firsthand. I think we need more creativity. We need people who, as Joanna properly pointed out, who have the kind of values, the kind of background, and the kind of inspiration that they can communicate. I will tell you that we find young people everywhere, anxious, ready, wanting to be involved if they have the right way that is satisfying to them, that gives them a meaningful expression. That's what this generation, you know, they say they're hedonistic. It's not true. They want to know what it means to me. How does this relate to the things I care about? And we have in our Lawfare Project hundreds of young people, young law students all over the country working against BDS and delegitimization. Erwin Cutler's own son worked in the project last summer. They come because they care. Young people care. But we're not giving them the ways, the means, the vehicles to give expression to it. Believe me, our community is there. They're not alienated. They're being disaffected because we're doing it. It's not what they do, it's what we do. The same on BDS. It's not what our enemies do. It's what we fail to do. Martin Luther King said, we'll never be judged by the attacks of our enemy, but by the silence of our friends. It's when we raise the bar on what we will tolerate, when we don't stand up, call things for what they are, not get lost in the negatives, finding the positive expressions to counter it, but at the same time, holding to account those who endanger the future and security of the Jewish people.